Hello and welcome to the Eastern Herald. I am Muzaffar Ahmad Noori Bajwa, and today we bring you an exclusive in-depth analysis of one of the biggest geopolitical shifts happening right now, the rise of BRICS and its impact on the global economy. At the Eastern Herald, we are committed to delivering fact-based geopolitical analysis, exclusive expert interviews, and deep insight into international affairs. Today, we examine a series of critical questions that are shaping the global power dynamics today. Can BRICS truly challenge Western financial dominance? Is India shifting its stance between the BRICS and the United States? How are China's economic and military ambitions influence global alliance? And with Trump back in the Oval Office, how will Washington respond to these challenges? To help us break down these complex issues, we are joined by Dr. Aparna Pande, Director of the India Initiative at the Hudson Institute, a leading expert on South Asia and global geopolitics. This is the Eastern Herald, and we are bringing you the stories that shape the future. In just a few months, global power dynamics have shifted dramatically. With the Trump 2.0 administration now in power, we are witnessing a bold new era where traditional alliances are being redefined. Before we delve deeper, I would like to begin with a critical inquiry. Dr. Aparna Pande, while discussing the new US administration and its potential impact on global geopolitics, emphasized that the Trump 2.0 government is likely to prioritize China as the central focus of its foreign policy. She highlighted that Russia remains a key player in this strategic equation, while India could assume a crucial role in balancing power dynamics. According to Dr. Pande, the evolving relations among these nations will be shaped by the administration, approach to trade security, and diplomatic engagements with a strong emphasis on countering Beijing's growing influence. Moving on, as Trump re-enters the Oval Office, the geopolitical landscape is in flux. BRICS is increasingly being positioned as a counterweight to Western bloc. However, question remains about its internal cohesions. To explore this further, I asked Dr. Aparna Pande, noted that while BRICS aims to counterbalance Western bloc, internal divisions, especially that enduring India-China tensions, hinder its cohesion and co-effectiveness. She emphasized that despite its economic ambitions, BRICS remain marginal in global financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, limiting its ability to challenge a Western-led economic structure in any meaningful way.
The Trump 2.0 will in some ways be very similar to Trump 1.0. We all know what happened at that time, and especially with respect to China or India. The India-US partnership is very strong. President Trump has a personal relationship with Prime Minister Modi, but the India-US partnership is strong. It is strong on defense and security, on economic and commercial, and also on a very strong people-to-people relationship. And that will continue. It has continued for the last 3 decades, and it will continue in the Trump 2.0. The first sign of that was that the Quad foreign ministers meeting was held the day after the inauguration of President Trump, which meant that that the India, US, Indo-Pacific, China, and Quad mean a lot to the incoming the new administration. Second, China is front and center for the Trump administration. For the American establishment, the peer competitor, the peer rival today is China. And the aim of the US administration, especially the Trump administration, is to push back against China's economic, military, and technological rise. And they would like their friends and partners and allies, countries like India, to be with them and support them in this desire to push back against China. India too has its own concerns about China. China is India's biggest rival and has been for the last 7 decades. It's also India's threat because it occupies Indian territory. And it is trying to strategically encircle India on the land and in the sea. And so both India and the US have a similar view of China. And so the India-US partnership will deepen. The Trump administration will focus on the Indo-Pacific. They will focus on China. They will want to strengthen relations with India. There will be some areas where the two countries will not agree, but by and large, the two countries will agree on most strategic, big picture issues.
Dr. Aparna Pande argued that BRICS lacks the structural and financial capacity to challenge the dominance of the US dollar. She emphasized that despite discussions on de-dollarization, BRICS has not introduced a viable alternative currency. Instead, she noted that Russia and China are advancing their own economic interests, with Beijing pushing the yuan for energy transactions. Rather than a unified BRICS strategy, she reviewed this as a calculated move by Moscow and Beijing to expand their financial influence independently.
So BRICS, I mean, BRICS evolution and growth in the coming years will face challenges. BRICS was an organization which could have evolved in the last decade or two, especially basically during a time when there were no two global powers, and there was no great power competition. Basically, since the end of the Second World War, since the end of the Cold War, the only superpower in the world was the United States. And over the last 2 decades, there had been an America which was okay with the notion of a multipolar world, having lots of organizations, regional groupings, some of which the US was a part of, some which US was not a part of. Um, However, in the last few years and moving forward, we are going into an area of great power competition. It's two countries and basically their partners and allies. It's not a multipolar world order which is coming about. And therefore, an organization like BRICS, which has China and Russia, which are antithetical to American interests, uh, along with countries like India, UAE, Brazil, and others, which are American partners, will find it very difficult to move forward except in having meetings and periodic summits on an annual basis. Because if BRICS had to move forward, they should have they would have been able to do so in the last 15 years. Just two examples. BRICS, in the last 15 years, the BRICS Bank has given the same amount of money in loans that the World Bank gives in 1 year. So it's not as though the BRICS has compensated for the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, though Bretton Woods institutions still give more aid than BRICS has done. Secondly, the notion of a BRICS currency is difficult because Russia and China would want their currencies, and there's no way that India will accept Chinese currency or Russian currency and will give up using the dollar. The Indian rupee is not going to be used by every other country, and so there is going to be a limit to what. Finally, the new Trump administration does not like groupings like BRICS, any grouping which has China in it. And so while the grouping can continue as a summit, if it starts issuing or talking about currency and de-dollarization, then the likelihood that the Trump administration will again threaten tariffs, as President Trump has already said twice, that he will impose 100% tariffs if BRICS moves towards a currency. And as you have seen with the example of Colombia just yesterday, where he threatened tariffs and threatened to stop trade, and then Colombia agreed to take back the immigrants. This is an administration which will threaten and act. And so BRICS is going to face challenges, except It can continue as a regional organization, but its ability to deliver more will be very difficult in today's age.
Dr. Aparna Pande underscored China's expanding global footprint, emphasizing that its economic influence extends far beyond BRICS. She pointed to the widespread use of the Chinese yuan and cited the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank as an example, noting that it primarily operates with Chinese capital. According to her, BRICS as a bloc is not actively challenging the West. Rather, it is China that is leading the effort to reshape global power dynamics on its own terms. But de-dollarization is still nowhere in the question.
No, it isn't. How is BRICS challenging the dollar? Please explain that to me. The dollar is the currency everybody uses. Um, when India purchases oil from Russia, Russia does not want Indian rupees, they want Chinese currency. Then there's no BRICS currency which they want. At the end of the day, Russia's problems are that Russia cannot access dollars. It cannot access all its money in foreign banks. Please tell me how BRICS is challenging the West. Half of the countries in the expanded BRICS are American partners and allies. United Arab Emirates, India, Brazil. None of them are challenging the West. They are, I mean, Brazil is part of the West. So, so it's not as, so they are not challenging the West. The BRICS was an organization which was set up, as I said earlier, when there was this notion there may be a multipolar world order. And so there are lots of different organizations, each of which is balancing each other. We do not live in a multipolar world order. We are moving closer to great power competition, which means two countries, United States and China, and their friends and partners. BRICS, RIC, all of these Shanghai Cooperation Organization will not be able to challenge the West. To challenge, you need to have economic muscle and military muscle and be able to push back. BRICS cannot do that. China is different. China is challenging the West. BRICS is not. China's sort of, goal is to become the superpower. China does challenge the United States. BRICS does not.
China's rapid ascent is undeniable. Its massive investments in infrastructure, technological innovation, and military capabilities are reshaping global power. In fact, China's unveiling of sixth generation fighter jet has sent shockwaves across Washington. Addressing this development, I asked Dr. Aparna Pande highlighted that China's unveiling of a sixth generation fighter jet signals its push for military supremacy, raising concerns in Washington. She emphasized that the Trump 2.0 administration is likely to respond with increased defense spending, stronger technological safeguards, and deeper military alliances to maintain America's edge. She also noted that this administration will continue prioritizing innovation in defense and AI driven warfare to counter China's rapid advancements.
That narrative is there, so but that is because there is this notion that there should be something which pushes back against the West. There should be something
Yeah.
which is, sort of, well, again, look at AIIB. What has the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank been able to do? They have delivered money, but most of the money is Chinese money. And so at the end of the day, whether the BRICS Development Bank, AIIB, or BRI, sort of the dependence on China has grown. Sort of it's not as though any of these countries have sort of, their debt has come down. Sort of none of that. And challenge and sort of, an alternative is when you are able to stand up to the other side. If the Bretton Woods institutions, if it is IMF, which comes in every time to bail out a country, not BRICS Development Bank, not AIIB, if it is World Bank, which gives billions in order for climate or development, then how is there a challenge from BRICS or AIIB to the West?
Dr. Pandey stressed that China poses a significant threat to India, particularly given the stark disparity in military and economic capabilities. She pointed out that China's military budget is 4 times that of India, while its economy is nearly 5 to 7 times larger. Additionally, she highlighted concerns over India's slowing economic growth, which could further impact its ability to counterbalance China's expanding influence in the region.
They sort of, since Trump 1.0, so I would say three presidential administrations, Trump 1.0, Biden, and then Trump 2.0, there has been a realization inside the US security establishment and broader policy establishment that China's military rise has to be countered, and the US needs to remain the preeminent power. And so the US will invest. It'll invest more technology, invest more money. And at the end of the day, the US does attract the best talent in the world. The US does have access to, sort of the best technology in the world, and it does have a lot of resources. And so the US will work on that, and US will sort of, the aim of the Trump 2.0 will be to ensure, or let's say, not necessarily ensure, let's say re-establish American military and tech might, and even economic might. But we'll have to see how they do it. The incoming administration has already talked about what they're going to do. They're going to invest more in technology, civilian, and defense. And so, yes, China will keep building its military and tech base, but so will the United States. The US has fallen behind a little because for a very long time, the US was the only country which invested so much in military. And sort of there was no country for the next 20 points on the rank. But now China is slowly moving up, and so the US will counter that. How and when they'll do it, we'll have to wait and see. But the Trump 2.0, for them, military and tech is big.
She emphasized China's strategic encroachment on India, noting that Chinese forces are already present in Indian territory in north. She also highlighted Beijing's broader geopolitical maneuvering, encircling India through its influence over neighboring countries. This is, she argued, poses a significantly security challenge for India.
It sits on Indian territory in the north. It is strategically encircling India through each of India's neighbors. It has dual use ports all across the Indian Ocean, including right in Sri Lanka and Pakistan. And so it is there in sort of in Bangladesh, it is there in Maldives, it is there in Nepal, it is there in every neighbor of India's.
Russia, on the other hand, has been using strong rhetoric to justify its actions on the global stage. Its portrayal of neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv is a prime example, one that not only shapes domestic narrative but also complicates international diplomacy. To understand the implications, I asked Dr. Pande, Russia's portrayal of neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv remains a cornerstone of its justification for aggression. How does such rhetoric complicate US-Russia diplomacy, and could it further polarize global support around Ukraine?
I mean, Russia's invasion of Ukraine had to and still has to do with the notion inside sort of some elements of the Russian state, especially President Putin, that Ukrainian territory is Russian territory and part of Mother Russia, and it needs to be regained. It is irredentism. It is a desire to regain territory. Calling sort of the regime Nazi or anti-Nazi has less to do with it. The desire for that territory has all to do with it. It's a desire to get Ukrainian territory under the notion that Ukrainian territory is all Russian territory and part of Mother Russia. That's the main thing. Now, what will happen in a war? The war this February, it will be 3 years since that war started. Everybody in the world wants the war to end. The question at the end of the day is going to be, how is that war going to end? Is it going to be a frozen conflict where there will be troops on both sides, but there will be no active war? Will there be an exchange of territory, or will the war continue? Those are the only options. Now, what happens will depend on, at some level, how much is President Zelensky willing to give, how much is President Putin willing to accept, and what leverage does President Trump and to his advisors have on President Putin as well as President Zelensky. We will wait and see. Sort of people may want an end to war. The question will be, um, how does President Putin want to look to his people? How does President Trump want to look not just to the Americans but to the rest of the world? And what will be the message that China and other countries will get? That you can invade a country and take territory and then get away with it? In which case, China may think Taiwan is is worthy of annexation. So we will have to wait and see how this progresses. Um, it's still not very clear what's going to happen, but it will all depend on what is each side willing to accept at the end of the day.
Recent media reports have highlighted significant corruption within Ukraine's armed forces, a concerning backdrop given the extensive support provided by the previous administration. This raises a pivotal question about the future of United States and Ukraine relations under Donald Trump. I now turn on to another critical inquiry. Dr. Aparna Pande of the Hudson Institute noted that President Trump is expected to take a remarkably different approach to global alliance. She emphasized that his administration is unlikely to provide substantial financial aid to Ukraine or other allies, with the sole exception of Israel.
There are two views within the Trump administration. There are those who believe that the war should be ended as soon as possible, um, and it should be a way in which each side gets something, but quickly. And then there are others who say that we cannot send a message to China that you can take over territory and get away with it. Because then China will see that as I mentioned, will see that as an example, and that it can take over Taiwan. That issue, however, when that issue is resolved, we will know. But the massive amount of economic assistance or military assistance which Ukraine was getting, it will not get at that level, because the Trump administration will not give any country massive amounts of economic or military assistance, with the exception of Israel. There's no other country which will get a lot of aid and economic and military aid, because President Trump wants to focus all attention on the United States and not on other countries. Other countries will need to take care of themselves. As I mentioned, it will depend on the decision within the Trump administration on how much to pressure each side. Are they going to pressure both Putin and Zelensky? Are they going to pressure one more than the other? And what leverage do they have especially with President Putin, to convince him to stop the conflict and to actually make it frozen, and move forward? We will have to wait and see.
In South Asia, another significant development is Beijing's deepening investment in Pakistan. From critical infrastructure projects to advanced military hardware, this investment is reinforcing Islamabad's regional posture and could shift the strategic balance in the region. To delve into this issue, Dr. Aparna Pande highlighted that Beijing's expanding investment in Pakistan, particularly through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is CPEC, are reshaping the strategic landscape in South Asia. She emphasized that China's deepening economic and military ties with Islamabad strengthen Pakistan's position while simultaneously increasing India's security concerns.
China's relationship with Pakistan goes back to the 1950s. That's when their relationship started. It was economic, at the start, but it has been strategic for the last 3 decades. It's not new. Sort of China sees Pakistan as its secondary deterrent. Pakistan helps keep India tied down to South Asia because if India has a two-front threat, the land border with Pakistan and the land border with China, then Indian troops and Indian resources are diverted on two fronts. If India does not have a problem with Pakistan and their issues get resolved, then all of India's resources and troops can be sort of focused on the land border with China and the maritime border on the Indian Ocean front. So from China's point of view, it's a very small investment in order to keep bolstering Pakistan, building Pakistan's especially military advantages so that it remains sort of, in some sort of, it keeps poking India periodically. That's the main aim of China, and that aim will remain. It's the same as China does with North Korea. China keeps pushing North Korea so that North Korea keeps South Korea and Japan tied down. That is a Chinese policy. And so China will continue to do that. China has also extended that into building, sort of the BRI or the CPEC in Pakistan, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. But it's there in Nepal, it's there in Bangladesh, it is there in Sri Lanka, and it is there in Maldives. So all of India's neighbors, China has built security relations. It has made all of those countries depend on China, massive amounts of debt, one fourth or almost a half. I mean, Sri Lanka's debt default almost 3 years ago was primarily because of the debt they owe China under BRI. And just as Gwadar is under Chinese management, so is Hambantota under Chinese management. So Pakistan-China relationship, the defense cooperation, the intelligence cooperation, and strategic value of Pakistan to China will remain. Because for China, India needs to be kept tied down. India's resources need to be diverted so that India cannot build its own resources and become a global power and at some level a challenge to China. And that's where the role of the US comes in. Sort of US-India closer cooperation on the defense field, in the economic arena, in the strategic arena, means that India will help India build its economy, help India modernize its military, sort of army, navy, and air force, build its maritime capacity so as to push back against China.
India has long championed strategic autonomy, a principle that has allowed it to navigate complex regional dynamics. However, as China grows more assertive, there is mounting speculation on whether New Delhi will pivot decisively towards Washington or continue its multi-aligned approach. To address this, I asked Dr. Aparna Pande that India has traditionally embraced strategic autonomy. In face of an assertive China, do you foresee New Delhi leaning more decisively towards Washington or retaining a fluid and multi-aligned stance?
India will retain its strategic autonomy stance, but yes, there is an alignment towards the United States, and it's strategic. It's required because of China and what China is doing in India's region. And even though the Indian Foreign Secretary is in China, and there are meetings, and the two countries signed the border agreement at the end of last year. Sort of, yes, there will be, I mean, both sort of, I know the Chinese side would like some resumption of visas and, travel and flights, as well as some economic sort of, economic cooperation between the two countries. Let's see how far it goes. Because I don't believe that the border agreement, they have gone beyond the first stage, which was simply to, de-escalate. The troops are not facing each other. China has yet to bring its troops back down, to take its troops further away and relocate them and normalize. So if it's only stage one of the border agreement, that is what China has done time and again for the last 13 years. It's nothing new. And so why India would therefore see everything as normal is difficult. But yes, China is India's neighbor. They have an economic relationship. Um, and so at some level, India will normalize the relationship, but it will not go back to what it used to be even 4 years ago. Forget about being what it used to be 6 or 8 years ago, because China's presence in South Asia, especially among all of India's neighbors, um, and China's strategic encirclement of India will not change. And so China is and will always remain India's biggest threat.
We are witnessing a once in a century shift in global power. The next decade will determine whether BRICS truly challenges the US dollar or its internal divisions hold it back. What do you think? Will BRICS reshape global trade, or will the rifts, particularly between India and China, limit its influence? Can the US dollar maintain its dominance in a rapidly multipolar world? How will shifts in US policy under Trump impact alliances in Europe and South Asia? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the Eastern Herald for more in depth global analysis.